truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, the 1219th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. With a paid subscription, you will receive the ad-free experience of the podcast. You will get to participate in the conversation on Substack, and you can join the interactive live streams every Wednesday afternoon. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack or a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. So during the live stream yesterday, we discussed briefly a reported anti-Trump coup being plotted to take place at the Republican National Convention by Nikki Haley and the people around her. The Republican establishment and donor class do not want to deal with another presidential term of Donald J. Trump. And if they're going to be stuck with that, if that is what they're going to have to face, then they want to exert as much leverage as they have right up front to win some concessions from Donald Trump about policy, perhaps, about the official Republican platform that will be announced and approved at the Republican convention, potentially staffing the next Trump administration. Those sorts of concessions all the way up to who Donald Trump chooses as his vice presidential running mate, assuming that the process goes as it traditionally has throughout our lifetimes, where the presidential nominee will name his own running mate and they will be the ticket. That, of course, is not how it was done when our nation was founded. The electors from the several states would vote for a president. When a president had gained the majority of electors, a new vote was taken among the electors for vice president. All of that was changed, of course. And now, instead of candidates independently running on their own merits, we have lines of succession being created by the party system. And this has distorted our politics in countless ways, but we don't have to get into those right now. This supposed coup plot was uncovered by none other than Laura Loomer, and then it was reported in the National Pulse. Under the headline, Nikki Haley staffer confirms convention coup plot against Trump. Former South Carolina Governor Nimrata Nikki Haley appears to be plotting a coup to seize the Republican presidential nomination from former President Donald J. Trump by forcing a brokered Republican National Convention in mid-July. Haley has continued to court donor support despite suspending her presidential campaign in March. Social media posts from Midi Randhawa, Haley's brother, have added fuel to speculation that the former South Carolina governor may attempt a floor revolt similar to the one spearheaded by Senator Ted Cruz during the 2016 Republican convention. Haley's brother posted a picture of himself with Nikki Haley on Sunday, saying the support is real, Nikki Haley for president, Milwaukee, here we come. To that, Laura Loomer responded and asked if they were planning a coup against Trump at the convention. Haley's brother wrote in response to Loomer, "Yup, what the actual hell? Deal with it. It's happening, sis." Before adding, there is a movement, a serious movement, and you and your minions cannot deny it. Now, is this all just a public show? Sure. It could be. Just like Ron could be. We should always consider what other possibilities there might be beyond the option we are being given by the television. But is Nikki Haley's brother in on the plot? Hey, maybe. But the more questions like that you ask, the more you understand that you have to consider that there might be a GOP establishment movement pushing Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, it's possible, could be playing along with that effort on behalf of Donald Trump and ultimately on behalf of MAGA, rather than going along with it in an actual attempt to take down Donald Trump. It's possible. But just like with Ron, we consider that possibility, and we consider the possibility that there actually is a serious anti-Trump effort from the same Republican establishment that has opposed Donald Trump now for 9 years. It is not that great a stretch to think that they are doing business the way they have always done business for decades and decades in politics. Now, Donald Trump may be using the fact that they operate this way in an effort to expose how they operate and make sure that their power is removed and they are held accountable. And Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and who knows how many others may be involved in that effort with him. But there's no reason to simply assume that and then leave ourselves open to the narrative effects of other possibilities that we have ignored because we are so certain that everything is quote unquote kayfabe. Even if you believe that that is the most likely option, it's still not the only option, and the goal is to be prepared for all of them so that no matter what emerges in reality in the future along an informational timeline, we will have thought it through and prepared ourselves to respond mentally and emotionally, if not with some sort of action. All throughout the fake primary season and even before, I talked on this show about the potential of something being done at the convention. When the elections aren't real and everyone involved in the elections knows that, then the whole process is actually something else. They follow the rules of that process to the extent that the public is going to hold them accountable for following or not following those rules. And if no one's going to hold them accountable, then the rules simply don't matter. So has Donald Trump won and secured the requisite number of delegates throughout these fake primaries? Yes, that is exactly what's been reported. Does that mean there will be no more shenanigans and that all the rules will be followed as written? No, of course it doesn't. And this will come even more into play on the other side. We will get to that in just a second. So the story goes that Loomer and Nikki Haley's brother were tweeting back and forth at one another. I mean, sending posts on X, formerly Twitter. And through this tweeting, the coup plot was discovered. Well, if you're plotting a coup, you got to make sure that people don't know about your coup plot before you start it. If the entire country knows about your coup plot for 2 months, it's going to be really hard to carry out that coup in front of everyone without everyone saying, hey, isn't that coup we heard about? You know, I never expected it to happen, but here it is happening, this coup. And I'm told that coups aren't a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and object to this coup. Let's support Donald Trump. Nikki Haley now has even less power than she had before. You don't want to be seen plotting a coup to undermine Donald Trump at this point. People have become pretty hip to coups being plotted to undermine Donald Trump by now. I've talked often over the last few years about how MAGA, Donald Trump, MAGA supporters, none of us need to make compromises on anything at all. Not to win rigged elections, that is for damn sure. Unity would be nice, but only around the proper goals based on the proper values. We don't unify with terrible people just for the sake of unity. It should be no surprise at all that anti-Trump factions are attempting to exert as much leverage as possible over Donald Trump to weaken his position and strengthen their position at every possible opportunity. Now, I grant that it's possible that all of this stuff has already been taken care of and these people are subdued and this is all just a show. I am totally on board with that interpretation as a possible reality. But leaving that aside, it's still good to understand the mechanics so we know what to look out for in case a different reality than we are expecting begins to emerge. So, with the coup plot revealed by Nikki Haley's brother on a public platform, it is important to then tamp down any notion of a coup being plotted because you can't have that out there with everyone knowing. If you're going to plot a successful coup, that all needs to be done in secret, and then a different narrative needs to be projected to the public so that they are prepared for the coup to happen and they want it to happen. But if the coup plot goes public, then the opportunity to make the coup seem like an organic, random, naturally occurring event basically disappears, and the narrative meant to get everyone on the same page about wanting the coup becomes impossible to sell and becomes transparent and obvious as some sort of manufactured and contrived event. And we see that phenomenon happening over and over and over and over and over again. There is some future subversion being plotted against Donald Trump. A narrative is generated to convince the public that Trump is the bad guy. Here is a problem that needs solving. Trump can't solve the problem. In fact, he created the problem. What you need to do is hate Donald Trump and go with this other option. We saw that narrative framework being used to undermine Donald Trump on the issue of immigration for months on end, while the Uniparty was generating approval for Mike Johnson's package. We were being told that Mr. Build That Wall and Mr. Travel Ban was responsible for the immigration problem. That wasn't the sort of interpretation that could be built up from nothing on an objective consideration of all the facts. That was a contrived and manufactured anti-Trump effort that was so blatant and so transparent that it helped expose the agenda of the people pushing the narrative. And we have the same here. And so a response was necessary. Whether the coup plot was real or fake, the response was necessary. Whether the coup plot is still ongoing or has ended, the response was still necessary, and the response would be the same in any of those cases. And so here is Nikki Haley's response.
I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border, no more excuses, a president who would support capitalism and freedom, a president who understands we need less debt, not more debt. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump. Having said that, I stand by what I said in my suspension speech. Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me, and not assume that they're just going to be with him. And I genuinely hope he does that.
So that was Nikki Haley speaking at the Hudson Institute, and thank goodness she had a speech arranged that would be recorded so that she could express her tepid endorsement of Donald Trump and say that she was going to vote for him as the only alternative to Joe Biden. Now, she talked about millions of people who came out and voted for her. That's not true. There's no reason to believe that millions of people came out and voted for Nikki Haley. Yes, she does get 16 or 17% of the reported vote in all of these fake primaries, pretty much each and every state. She even, quote unquote, won in Washington, D.C. and in Vermont. Is she talking about, I guess, maybe thousands of Democrats who switched and voted in the Republican fake primaries in order to create a narrative of anti-Trump sentiment within the Republican Party? Trump certainly does not have to cater to Nikki Haley or her supporters, including her supporters in the donor class, at least not to, quote unquote, win a rigged election. There might be other reasons to court the support of those donors, and there might be reasons to negotiate and make deals with those donors. Trump is mid-negotiation all the time. But those people don't have to be catered to, certainly not to generate outcomes in electoral politics where the outcomes are already decided. Now, if we're able to advance past that point in the next 5.5 months, that would be wonderful, but there is no reason to think that is in our immediate future. Again, I would love to be wrong, but I don't suspect we'll be getting off that easy. Here are MSNBC's Nicole Wallace and Vaughn Hilliard reacting to Nikki Haley bailing out on them.
Someone who served as ambassador to the United Nations, who's still pulling in pretty large numbers, a vote 2 months after quitting the race. Someone who ran against Donald Trump as too old and unfit to serve today said he has her vote. Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley in 2015 said, quote, Donald Trump is everything I taught my children not to do in kindergarten. I taught my little ones, you don't lie and make things up. She ended up serving in his administration.
Who are these people?
On January 6th, she called it an ugly day. She then went and said a couple months later that she wouldn't run against him for president. She ended up running for president. And then we saw Nikki Haley, while her husband was deployed to Africa with the U.S. Armed Services, mocked by Donald Trump for being away. And it was the words of Nikki Haley that were very explicit about Donald Trump. Said, in part, that they were disgusting, awful, unhinged, and said that somebody that makes comments like that doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief. Her own husband got on social media and fired back and said the difference between humans and animals would never allow the dumbest ones to lead the pack. His allies pushed extramarital affair rumors about her. This is somebody who suggested that she may not even be eligible to run for president because her parents are immigrants. And today, her announcing that she's going to vote for Donald Trump is just, I think, another chapter in something that we've already lived out with the likes of Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio 8 years ago. She did raise her hand in that Republican debate and said that she would vote for a convicted felon if Donald Trump was found guilty. And today is evidence that she's sticking to her word.
We need shrinks and cult experts to explain this, because with what you're reporting, it doesn't make a lick of sense to me, and it's so recent. I mean, J.D. Vance in 2015 said something similar, but for her and her husband to both been feuding publicly with him just days and weeks before endorsing him is inexplicable to me at a human level.
I think it's power. And I think in American politics, access to power in a party that you identify with is a future. and think that we have a great share of individuals that have proved this time and again that staying closely associated to Donald Trump is a guarantee that you are relevant within politics if you choose to remain in politics.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So the Nikki Haley coup plot could be real, could be fake. It could be off now that she says she's voting for Trump, or that just could be misdirection. So they keep the coup plot on. All those options are still on the table. It is clear, though, that there are those in the Uniparty who thought there was a chance that Nikki Haley might be able to flex some muscle, I guess, with the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby and the Ukraine lobby and all the neoconservatives within Con Inc. at her back. Maybe Nikki Haley would have been successful. The hopes were there. Now they are crushed. More cries of agony on the part of the adults in the room, or at least that is what we are being shown. Nicole Wallace and Vaughn Hilliard, just the surrogates for the many untapped wells of emotion among the dwindling numbers of supporters of the Uniparty establishment still watching MSNBC. Now, the funny thing about this was that a couple of weeks ago, there were reports in Axios that Nikki Haley was being considered as a Trump running mate. And they float these reports every few days, every week or so, about a different candidate. Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, J.D. Vance, Kristi Noem, Tulsi Gabbard. We just hear name after name after name. People trying to be turned into national figures. Someone just has a spark and Trump thinks, oh, well, I have to select this person now. The TV has made all my supporters really, really like this person. Except that's not how it works. It's preposterous, but people who are still connected to the central narrative, they love this stuff. They like choosing their favorite potential candidate and arguing why that person really would be the best and that Trump should definitely select that person. And you say, Tim Scott, huh? Why do you think Tim Scott's the guy? And they'll say things like, I don't know, man. I just feel like he's the guy. Or he's going to help us with the black vote. And sure, you can make fun of this kind of normie behavior, but they're getting it from the television and from Con Inc. influencers who can't stop talking about who Donald Trump should pick as VP. Sure, they've been wrong about absolutely everything else when it comes to Trump for 9 straight years running, but he should really listen to them this time about the choice for vice president in his second or maybe third term. In response to the quote-unquote reporting in Axios, Donald Trump said Nikki Haley is not under consideration for the VP slot. But I wish her well. He signed it DJT. This was on May 11th on Truth Social. The idea that Nikki Haley would then have some sort of leverage at the convention begins to look even more ridiculous. The main prize in common political analysis, the VP slot, is just totally unavailable to Nikki Haley. So what would she even be bargaining for at that point? Now, we are being shown the Uniparty on full display throughout this year, so it would be really presumptuous to think that there's not going to be any challenge to Trump between now and that convention a little under 2 months from now in mid-July. Just as with the Uniparty in the electoral politics, you can see many paths being pursued at once. They would love to diminish Donald Trump enough to claim that he lost the election and be able to actually sell that narrative. But if they aren't able to do that, if they can't get rid of Trump somehow, then they're going to pursue the path that might convince the country that Donald Trump is actually Adolf Hitler and all his supporters are Nazis. And they're going to pursue the path to steal elections down ballot so that if they go ahead and accept Donald Trump, at least they can subvert him the whole time. They have the playbook. They have the resources. Of course, they're going to pursue all possibilities at once. So Nikki Haley saying that she's going to vote for Donald Trump in a rigged election 5.5 months from now should not be taken as some clear denial. This is not capitulation on the part of the Uniparty. It's just making the coup story go away. Now, Laura Loomer is a pretty savvy political operator, and she's often good at creating chaos. And so the other night she was out there pushing the narrative that Ron DeSantis was aware in advance of the Mar-a-Lago raid and had approved of that when Merrick Garland sent him notice that the FBI would be raiding Mar-a-Lago. Now, the claim about communication between Merrick Garland and Ron DeSantis seems to have come from a clickbait website called Real Raw News. So to that extent, it's pretty easy to dismiss. But then again, would the DOJ give a heads up to the governor of a state that they were about to come raid a quote unquote former president at the Winter White House in that state, knowing how heavily secured and guarded that piece of property is? You'd think that the DOJ and the FBI would want to know that they're not going to have interference from state or local police personnel upon the execution of that raid. But as far as the direct claim goes, there does not seem to be evidence for that. But would that be out of line? If you think that the Mar-a-Lago raid was a little suspicious and maybe Trump brought that on himself intentionally, and if all of this process is setting the predicate for all of this to be turned back around against the very members of the Uniparty deep state who've spent the last 9 years subverting Trump and subverting the American people, well, then this would be even more suggestive that Ron DeSantis was on Trump's team that whole time, that he is part of that same operation. But again, it doesn't have to be that. Laura Loomer was pushing the idea that Ron was welcoming this. If they go get Trump, that would make it more likely that Ron ends up becoming the Republican nominee for president. The Ron op had already been planned, the DeSantis simps had already been recruited, and the effort started publicly only 3 months after the Mar-a-Lago raid. So there are some convincing reasons to be on either side of that. And what are you supposed to do as a governor? Should you object to the federal law enforcement force that should not exist coming down to raid the home of a quote unquote former president? You can certainly argue that a governor should do that, but I'm not sure I would get on board with how this is being presented as though Ron DeSantis were part of some plot that might ultimately end in the death of Donald Trump. But it's worth at least being open to the possibility. The people who stage very deadly pandemics and then steal elections and stage very violent insurrections to then carry out a campaign of political persecutions and censorship and imprisonments have to be considered capable of political assassinations as well. And if all of these indictments were serious and the people running them were intelligent, competent people, and the judicial system could be counted on to achieve justifiable outcomes, maybe it would be easier to take the rest of this reported situation seriously. But as of now, it's not so easy. But let's at least take it seriously, understand the foundation of these claims, because if it's all true as reported, this is a rather grave situation. And if it's not, then what we're seeing is a framework, a predicate for what might be coming in the future when the accountability process begins in the other direction. This is from the Substack of reporter Julie Kelly. Declassified.live is the address of her publication. FBI authorized use of deadly force during Mar-a-Lago raid. An exhibit filed today by Donald Trump in a motion to suppress evidence seized during the FBI's August 2022 raid of Mar-a-Lago revealed shocking new details about the Bureau's plans to use deadly force and even engage the former president and his security detail that day if necessary. The document is just one of many court filings recently ordered unsealed by Judge Aileen Cannon, who is presiding over the matter in southern Florida. In an August 3rd, 2022 operations order for Plasmic Echo, the FBI's code name for the government's investigation into Trump's alleged mishandling of national defense material, FBI officials furnished instructions on how to proceed with the unprecedented raid. Quote, FBI, the Washington Field Office, and FBI Miami agents and the evidence response team will effect a search of designated locations within Mar-a-Lago to locate and seize classified information, NDI, and government records as described in captioned search warrant, end quote, the document read. The raid involved 25 Miami FBI agents, 4 Washington FBI agents, 1 unidentified individual from FBI headquarters, 1 DOJ attorney, and the assistant U.S. attorney from the Southern District of Florida. But according to the operations order, law enforcement was not preparing a routine search for presidential papers. One section of the plan described how agents should handle the potential for use of deadly force. And she attaches a document with the headline Policy Statement, Use of Deadly Force, 7/19/2022. So July 19th, just a couple of weeks before the Mar-a-Lago raid. 1. Law enforcement officers of the Department of Justice may use deadly force only when necessary. That is, when the officer has a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or to another person. A. Deadly force may not be used solely to prevent the escape of a fleeing subject. So if Donald Trump commandeered the beast and tried to speed away from Mar-a-Lago, they're not allowed to shoot him. But if Donald Trump jumps from the back of the beast and tries to strangle one of the Secret Service agents in the front seat, I guess at that point the FBI would have a justifiable use of force. B. Firearms may not be fired solely to disable moving vehicles. Specifically, firearms may not be discharged at a moving vehicle unless a person in the vehicle is threatening the officer or another person with deadly force by means other than the vehicle, or the vehicle is operated in a manner that threatens to cause death or serious physical injury to the officer or others, and no other objectively reasonable means of defense appear to exist, which includes moving out of the path of the vehicle. So again, if Trump is choking out a member of the Secret Service, then the FBI is allowed to use deadly force. And then if he begins driving the beast directly at the FBI and they can't get out of the way, then also deadly force. C. If feasible, and if to do so would not increase the danger to the officer or others, a verbal warning to submit to the authority of the officer shall be given prior to the use of deadly force. So the officer has to shout at Trump, "Let that man go and stop speeding toward the Capitol, all the way from Mar-a-Lago. The very violent insurrection is already over, sir." You have to give him a good, strong, commanding performance, a warning first. Warning shots are not permitted outside of the prison context. This is D. But in prison, warning shots are permitted. E. Officers will be trained in alternative methods and tactics for handling resisting subjects, which must be used when the use of deadly force is not authorized by this policy. So, Kung Fu, jump out of the way of the car, jump back into the window, and then use Kung Fu to get Trump to stop choking out the Secret Service agent while driving to the Capitol in hopes of overturning a very free and fair, safe and secure election. F. Deadly force should not be used against persons whose actions are a threat solely to themselves or property unless an individual poses an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others in close proximity. Officers should seek to gain voluntary compliance before using force if feasible, and if doing so would not increase the danger to the officer or others. Officer must prevent or stop as appropriate another officer from engaging in excessive or unlawful force or force that violates DOJ policy. And finally, officers must request and or render medical aid as appropriate. So you can jump in the beast, karate chop Trump, save the Secret Service agent and Cassidy Hutchinson, and then you have to give Trump an ice pack afterward. So those are the conditions where the FBI is allowed to use deadly force, or at least these were the rules a couple weeks prior to the Mar-a-Lago raid. Let's go on with Julie Kelly. The FBI also considered various scenarios should the former president unexpectedly arrive at his residence during the raid. Agents were also prepared to go door to door to terrorize Mar-a-Lago guests if staff refused to turn over room keys. In addition to lock-picking equipment, FBI agents were armed with standard-issue weapon, ammo, and handcuffs, as well as medium and large-sized bolt cutters. Perhaps most shockingly, the FBI team included a medic to tend to anyone injured during the raid. The operations order identified a nearby trauma center with directions how to get there. Additional exhibits in the unsealed motion today also indicate agents ransacked the bedrooms of Melania and Barron Trump. The head of the Washington FBI field office at the time was Stephen D'Antuono. In addition to spearheading the criminal investigation into the events of January 6th, which included his inability to identify and charge the so-called pipe bomber, D'Antuono led the Detroit FBI field office in 2020 when the FBI manufactured an entrapment scheme to make it appear that Trump supporters plotted to kidnap and kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. D'Antuono retired in November 2022, just 3 months after the Mar-a-Lago raid. Attorney General Merrick Garland approved the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago. Now, the philanthropist-funded global state propaganda outlet, the Associated Press, has a fact check out on this today. Naturally, it's reprinted in numerous outlets. Here it is in the Washington Post. Fact focus. Trump distorts use of deadly force language in FBI document for Mar-a-Lago search. What triggered this fact check is a post by Donald Trump on Truth Social. That said, wow, I just came out of the Biden witch hunt trial in Manhattan, the icebox, and was shown reports that crooked Joe Biden's DOJ, in their illegal and unconstitutional raid of Mar-a-Lago, authorized the FBI to use deadly, lethal force. Now we know for sure that Joe Biden is a serious threat to democracy. He is mentally unfit for office. 25th Amendment. Now, we'll get into the fact check in a second, but of course, anytime Trump mentions the 25th Amendment in relation to Joe Biden, you immediately snap back to that speech he gave in Alamo, Texas in January of 2021.
Before we begin, I'd like to say that free speech is under assault like never before. The 25th Amendment is of zero risk to me, but will come back to haunt Joe Biden and the Biden administration. As the expression goes, be careful what you wish for.
Now, if I had to guess, I would say Joe Biden will not be removed with the 25th Amendment. This is mostly a narrative device. The conversation may start. Prominent Democrats may discuss and consider Joe Biden being removed by the 25th Amendment, but I don't think ultimately it will happen. I don't deny that there are many factions who want to get Joe Biden out of the picture and replace him with someone else, most likely Gavin Newsom. Maybe Gretchen Whitmer, Michelle Obama, but I don't think any of those efforts are going to be successful. But let's get back to the fact check from the Associated Press. The claim was also boosted online by his supporters, but the language Trump referenced is a standard policy statement used for issuing search warrants and was not unique to the FBI's search of his property. It is actually meant to limit the use of deadly force. So they go through the claim and then the facts. Here's the claim. The Biden administration authorized the use of deadly force against former President Donald Trump during an FBI search of his Mar-a-Lago estate in 2022. The facts. The policy statement on the use of deadly force, which appeared in an operations order for the Mar-a-Lago search, is not evidence of a plot to kill Trump. As usual, the regime media is just being deceitful about what evidence is. Is this conclusive evidence? No. Is it compelling evidence? Well, maybe if it existed among other similar evidence, it could be a compelling piece of evidence in order to make the case that there was, in fact, a plot against Donald Trump. But no, in itself, it is not conclusive evidence. But of course, that's not really how evidence works. Then again, in the minds of a standard issue villager, the only evidence that exists is an admission derived from the authoritative source. So until the authoritative source says, yes, actually, we were engaged in a plot to kill the president using the FBI under the guise of a totally legitimate raid being carried out because Trump was holding on to documents that compromised our national security. Now, there is no chance that one single piece of evidence is going to lay all of that out in a conclusive fashion, especially not one derived directly from the authoritative source. We are being conditioned to believe that it is a conspiracy theory to reach obvious conclusions about the behavior of an adversarial force until that adversarial force admits what it's doing for our benefit. To even suggest that's how things work, or that's how things might work in some possible reality, is preposterous. It is a seemingly accepted delusion that much of our culture shares in. Every benefit of the doubt must be given to people who cannot stop lying intentionally to manipulate everyone else for more power, status, and wealth. It doesn't matter how abusive their behavior becomes, you simply are not allowed to reach any conclusion about them until they identify themselves as being worthy of that conclusion. Like dun dun dun, ABC News Nightly. Good evening, America. It turns out that everything we've said for the last 4 years is wrong. Remember when we told you that Joe Biden really received 81 million real lawful American votes? Ha! Turns out that wasn't true. Remember when we told you 2 weeks to slow the spread? Ha! You'll never guess. It's gotten so bad that even when they admit it right to our faces, everyone is like, well, you know, they were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. That's the best information any of us had. So sure, they reached a wrong conclusion, but we all reached the wrong conclusion. How can we hold them responsible for it when we reached the same conclusion? Well, hey, dummy, it's because they told you what conclusion to reach, and then you reached it. You just listened to them. And also, that wasn't the best information that anyone had at that point. We were actually giving you better information that both you and the media agree with now, and you are still agreeing with them and giving them the benefit of the doubt that we actually were conspiracy theorists then, and we are conspiracy theorists now for saying that they knew the whole time. This is how far off course we have steered. It absolutely is evidence of a plot. It's just not conclusive or compelling evidence in isolation. If there is an evidentiary pattern that emerges, then certainly it is a piece of evidence suggesting that there was a plot. This trick should not work anymore, but somehow it does. But let's get back to the facts from the Associated Press. Just to repeat, the policy statement on the use of deadly force, which appeared in an operations order for the Mar-a-Lago search, is not evidence of a plot to kill Trump. It is a Department of Justice policy that is standard to include in such documents. The FBI followed standard protocol in this search, as we do for all search warrants, which includes a standard policy statement limiting the use of deadly force. The agency said in a statement, "No one ordered additional steps to be taken, and there was no departure from the norm in this matter," end quote. As it appears in the operations order, the policy stipulates in part that Department of Justice officers, quote, may use deadly force only when necessary. That is, when the officer has a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or to another person. The policy is in the department's Justice Manual with only minor differences in wording to what is included in the order and is summarized on the FBI's website. Frank Filiuzzi, a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, reiterated in an X post, formerly Twitter, what the agency said in its statement. Yep, every FBI operations order contains a reminder of FBI deadly force policy, he wrote, even for a search warrant. Deadly force is always authorized if the required threat presents itself. A motion that Trump's lawyers filed in his federal classified documents case, also unsealed Tuesday, asserted that the August 2022 search was unconstitutional and illegal, misquoting the operations order as saying that, quote, law enforcement officers of the Department of Justice may use deadly force when necessary, end quote. And I don't know why they're calling that misquoting. It is just another way to say the thing that the order said. The Associated Press is attempting to frame Trump's attorneys as dishonest somehow, I guess based on the use of the phrase when necessary rather than writing the whole phrase out. I don't know. Trump wasn't at Mar-a-Lago, which was shuttered for the season at the time of the search. The Associated Press reported at the time that the FBI reached out to the Secret Service detail that provides protection to the former president and his homes shortly before serving the warrant. The facts did not stop Trump and his allies from spreading the erroneous allegation. A Trump campaign fundraising email with the subject line, "They were authorized to shoot me," was sent soon after he posted on social media and made even more outrageous claims. "I nearly escaped death," it reads. "You know they're just itching to do the unthinkable. Joe Biden was locked and loaded, ready to take me out and put my family in danger." Asked if Trump stands by the false claims, campaign press secretary Caroline Leavitt wrote in an email, "This is a sickening attempt to run cover for Joe Biden, who is the most corrupt president in history and a threat to our democracy." The article goes on to provide reactions from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Carrie Lake for whatever reason. I guess they're trying to show how easily triggered MAGA is or something, as if an assassination attempt against Donald Trump is impossible to conceive of. There have probably been many already that we simply don't know about. But leaving that aside, it is a regular topic of conversation now, including and maybe even especially by people running information operations on the so-called right, people who are Trump friendly or maybe even Trump supporters. It's been discussed openly on Tucker Carlson's show and on Alex Jones's show. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn has talked about it a number of times. It is my own suspicion that we will get a Trump assassination attempt narrative at some point over the course of the next 5.5 months, or maybe at some point in that post-election period. You have to consider that as a potential scare event. I know no one wants to think about it. And I imagine that people will get very angry at us when that story goes wide and we say, you got to wait on that. But one way or another, all of this narrative seeding seems designed as a lead up to that potential event. And maybe it takes the air out of that initial narrative deployment, or maybe this is some sort of conditioning and predictive programming. We cannot know that right now, but the pattern certainly is emerging. Assassination attempts, assassinations of world leaders being reported. Constant stories about Boeing malfunctions and Trump Force One is Boeing. People in the Trump orbit talking about assassinations. The ramping up of political persecutions and political targeting at the same time that none of the cases are actually panning out for any of the prosecutors. So you certainly can't dismiss the possibility of a real attempt. You definitely cannot dismiss the possibility of a widespread Trump assassination narrative. They keep trying different ways to get rid of Donald Trump. This is a trend that has been ongoing since he came down that escalator nearly 9 years ago. A coup plot at the National Convention, an assassination attempt by political opponents, justified by Trump being portrayed as the actual criminal. This is just stuff we've gotten used to by now. We saw attempts to take Donald Trump off the ballot for this election that we are rumored to be having this fall. And it's good that we've seen some of those issues work their way through the courts. It is actually happening now in reverse, or at least that is the surface interpretation of this. This is the New York Times yesterday. Ohio elections official threatens to exclude Biden from the ballot. So now it's Joe Biden whose name might not appear on a state's ballot. The Ohio General Assembly adjourned on Wednesday without addressing an issue that the state's top election officials said would prevent President Biden from being placed on the ballot there, escalating a partisan clash that could result in the president not being on the ballot in all 50 states in November. Frank LaRose, the Republican Secretary of State, has said that he plans to exclude Mr. Biden from the ballot because he will be officially nominated after a deadline for certifying presidential nominees on the ballot. This is usually a minor procedural issue, and states have almost always offered a quick solution to ensure that major presidential candidates remain on the ballot. The Biden campaign is considering suing the state in order to ensure Mr. Biden is on the ballot, while also searching for some other way to resolve the issue without moving the date of the nominating convention, according to a person with knowledge of the deliberations. A legal fight could be expensive and arduous. The Supreme Court recently ruled that states could not bar Mr. Trump from running for another term under a constitutional provision, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that prohibits insurrectionists from holding office. And of course, only Donald Trump could have made the determination at that point that Donald Trump had committed insurrection. But they don't care about that. Some lady at a court in Colorado said it on the basis of the sham January 6th committee's report. Therefore, it's true. The New York Times says it took 6 months of legal wrangling before the court put that issue to bed. Ohio is not considered a swing state. Mr. Trump won there with an 8-point edge in 2020. But the Biden campaign could be drawing into a months-long legal battle to ensure that the president is on the ballot in all 50 states. A legislative fix, which would have pushed back the certification deadline to accommodate the late date of the Democratic National Convention, stalled out this month as Republicans in the Ohio Senate tacked on a partisan measure that would ban foreign donations to state ballot initiatives. And the Democrats in Ohio, they just couldn't stand for that. Mr. LaRose has previously said that passing the ban is the price that Democrats must pay to ensure that Mr. Biden is on the ballot and that he would otherwise enforce the law as written. So Democrats in the state wanted this law changed to make sure that Joe Biden could be on the ballot, but they weren't willing to ban foreign donations to pass ballot measures in order to make a deal. Why do they want foreign donations being flooded into the ballot measure process? Oh, it's because they need to steal elections and create a narrative so that people will believe the reported outcomes. And of course, they need to incentivize people to take the risks involved in stealing elections. That don't come for free. The Times discusses instances of issues like this arising in the past, saying that the parties involved always worked things out so that the nominee of each major political party could always appear on the ballot. But then again, we have never attempted to hold a presidential election while the last one is still under contest and an illegitimate president and usurper working on behalf of a global entity rather than the American people has pretended to run for re-election again. So skipping down in the article, Mr. LaRose wrote that he would, quote, instruct boards of elections to begin preparing ballots that do not include the Democrat Party's nominees, end quote, unless the party offered a, quote, legally acceptable remedy for the issue. LaRose posted on X, formerly Twitter, I've said from here to Colorado that it's in the best interest of voters to have a choice in the race for president. I'm also duty-bound to follow the law as Ohio's chief elections officer. As it stands today, the Democrat Party's presidential nominee will not be on the Ohio ballot. That is not my choice. It's due to a conflict in the law created by the party, and the party has so far offered no legally acceptable remedy. The Ohio House Speaker said today there won't be a legislative solution. So I've sent a letter to Ohio Dems chair seeking, again, a solution that upholds the law and respects the voters. I trust they'll act quickly. And you can see that the Democrat Party here is trying to operate by force. They didn't want to give up the foreign funding for their ballot measures. Ohio is a quote unquote red state. But that doesn't mean that their elections are clean. It just means that the other brand is what is sold to the people of Ohio. Frank LaRose is far from a diehard MAGA warrior. But why didn't the Democrat Party just give up the foreign funding for ballot measures? Then this wouldn't be a problem. Now it is a problem. They scheduled their nominating convention. If Frank LaRose is Uniparty as he seems, then this isn't some shocking affront to the Uniparty and to Democrats. This is just part of the plan as it plays out. Republicans in the Ohio Senate advanced a bill that would resolve the issue, but attached a rider that would ban foreign money in state ballot initiatives, which Republicans in the state blamed for the passage last year of a constitutional amendment enshrining access to abortion in the state. Oh, so that's why they need foreign money and the election fraud apparatus. Jason Stevens, the House Speaker, has also been fending off a months-long effort by some Republicans to oust him and needs support from Democrat lawmakers in the minority to stay in power. In remarks to the press on Tuesday, Mr. Stevens said there was, quote, just not the will, end quote, to pass a solution in the legislature. Ohio Democrats denounced the lack of a legislative solution, and the chairwoman of the state party asserted in a statement on Tuesday that Republicans were trying to take Mr. Biden off the ballot. It sounds like Democrats are okay with Mr. Biden being left off the ballot so long as they continue getting foreign funding. Republican politicians at the state house made clear that they want to take away Ohioans' ability to choose who they want to be president. Elizabeth Walters, the party chair, said in a statement to the Ohio Capitol Journal, throughout this process, corrupt politicians in Columbus have politicized the process and used it to play political games. So when a Secretary of State follows the law that the legislature could have changed but decided not to change, that is a political game to keep the political opponent off the ballot. But when secretaries of state use totally unproven and unprovable claims like that Trump committed insurrection in order to remove Trump from the ballot while they are prosecuting him, hoping to imprison him for 700 years, tying him up in civil lawsuits to waste his time and take all his money, plotting coups to take him out at his own convention, and potentially creating scenarios for his assassination. That's just what Trump gets for being a criminal. So many ways to take out Trump. None of them work, but it's nice to see them all so that we know what they look like. And it's nice that all the standard issue villagers out there have argued that all these things are good for when they're all turned right back around. And we get to say, hey, commie, yeah, I know it sucks to see all those people you supported accused of crimes. But you see, there's real evidence here, and you said this is how it all should work. I mean, doesn't it feel good to stop doing the whole cover-up routine? No one believes you. You look ridiculous. You don't really believe Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, and we all know you can't prove it. And how do we know you can't prove it? Because even the people who certify the elections can't prove it. And we got news of that this week as well. This is a post on X, formerly Twitter, from Kevin Moncla, an investigative journalist who's been working on election integrity issues for years now. On Tuesday, he wrote, breaking lawsuit filed against Fulton County. Fulton County Board of Registrations and Elections member Julie Adams filed suit against the board and the elections director because her requests for election records necessary to perform her duties as required under Georgia law have been repeatedly denied. The people have had enough. Now, before we get into the lawsuit itself, you'll remember that we went through some Fulton County hearings a couple of weeks ago. The Georgia Election Board ended up voting to reprimand Fulton County for its conduct of the 2020 election. And they also appointed an independent monitor to oversee this fall's general election. Will that fix the election? No, it probably won't. But I guess we can be happy that these problems are being made ever clearer. And I also want to touch briefly on an article from back in February in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution announcing Julie Adams joining the Board of Registrations and Elections. The headline was, Second GOP member joins Fulton Election Board. The Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections once again has its full 5 members, apparently ending a months-long fight over seating a second Republican nominee. Julie Adams took the oath and her seat at Thursday's regular board meeting. Fulton County commissioners voted 6-0 to approve Adams' nomination by the Fulton County Republican Party January 24th. She will serve the remaining 17 months of a 2-year term ending June 30th, 2025. There was some controversy last year in the selection of board members. The Republican Party nominates 2, the Democrat Party nominates 2. One of the Republican Party's nominees was rejected multiple times. Last July, the Fulton County Republican Party sued the county commission over this man named Jason Frazier's nomination, claiming his rejection was, quote, because Frazier had sought to compel Fulton County to clean up its voter rolls, end quote. And of course, this is a problem everywhere. Voter registries are a mess, filled with thousands and in some states millions of dead voters, ineligible voters, voters who have moved, all manner of improper registrations. And then in a state that sends out mail-in ballots to everyone on the registry, you have thousands and potentially millions of ballots with no actual voter attached that can then be collected and voted. Cleaning up voter registries is a massive priority. It should be shocking that a man would be rejected for demanding clean voter rolls. But then again, it's 2024, and this is just what we come to expect now. Eventually, that dispute was ended with the appointment of this woman, Julie Adams. The press release from the Georgia GOP describes her as an, quote, election integrity champion. But let's get to the lawsuit. The document begins with a statement from Julie Adams, and then we will go through the introduction of the lawsuit, and then a few posts by Trump spokesperson Liz Harrington highlighting some of the claims made in the lawsuit. Here is the statement from Julie Adams. Today, on my behalf, the America First Policy Institute Center for Litigation and the law firm of Chalmers, Adams, Backer, and Kaufman filed an action in Fulton County Superior Court asking the court to declare that the Fulton County BRE, that's the Board of Registration and Elections, is the election superintendent for Fulton County with legal responsibility for the conduct of Fulton County elections. So she's working directly with the Trump-aligned America First Policy Institute's legal center. She's asking the court to affirm that the Board of Registration and Elections is the authority on elections in Fulton County. Since assuming my position as a BRE member in January of this year, I have sought repeatedly to have access to the election processes and the materials that are necessary for me. As a member of BRE, should have ongoing access in order to fulfill my statutory duties. We are asking for immediate review and decision by the court to remedy this situation so that the BRE members can be fully advised about and engaged in the elections in our county and to restore the faith of the citizens of this county in the outcome of today's primary election and the rest of the elections this year and every year. And Georgia just held their primaries on Tuesday. So here is the intro to Julie Adams versus the Fulton County Board of Elections and Registration. The Georgia legislature carefully crafted the process by which elections would be conducted in the state of Georgia and by each county of the state. This action seeks to ensure that these laws are followed in Fulton County. Since assuming her duties as a member of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections, the BRE, plaintiff has been prevented from performing her statutory duties as a BRE member, as she has been denied and continues to be denied access to essential election materials and processes by which elections in Fulton County are conducted. Over the years, the board has purportedly delegated core BRE responsibilities to an appointed election director. Plaintiff swore an oath to, quote, prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse, end quote, in Fulton County elections and to, quote, make a true and perfect return, end quote. These obligations are frustrated by the repeated and continuing refusal to allow plaintiff access to and direct knowledge of the information plaintiff reasonably believes she needs to execute her duties faithfully and thoroughly. Plaintiff's requests for data have been stymied by direct instructions from the BRE's chair to the staff that plaintiff is to be denied access to key election information. Defendant Nadine Williams, elections director, has informed plaintiff that her requests for supporting documentation relative to election results are unnecessary because the director's summaries are submitted to a, quote, rigorous validation process, end quote, and should simply be trusted. Without the ability to confirm the accuracy of the returns and the ability to observe and inspect the various election processes in Fulton County, plaintiff voted against the certification of election results in the recent presidential preference primary, the PPP. The defendants have confirmed to plaintiff their decision to continue their refusal to allow access to key information for the primary election of May 21st, 2024. So I imagine you're already like, wait, what? Are they serious? And yes, they seem to be serious. To summarize, Julie Adams, this new member of the Board of Registration and Elections, is suing because she is tasked as part of her job and part of the oath she swore to, quote, prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse, and to make sure that the election she signs off on represents a true and perfect return. She wants to get information so that she can verify that, and she is being told that she simply has to trust the elections director because what that elections director submits to her will have been put through a rigorous validation process. So basically, she is just supposed to rubber stamp whatever the elections director submits. What kind of representatives of the people would ever create a process like this? Only the most corrupt and complicit people you could possibly imagine would ever do something like this to the people of Georgia. Not only are they making the process totally opaque to the people of Georgia, who cannot get access to election evidence even after the courts order it, the elections officials themselves can't get access to the evidence. Is it possible to produce a legitimate election under these conditions? No, it sure isn't. Does this sort of thing happen everywhere? Yeah, of course it does. It's not magic. It's not a mystery. They set up a system to produce the election results they want. These people have a depopulation agenda. Do you really imagine they're going to let you vote on it? Let's close out this introduction from the suit, though. Consequently, plaintiff is unable to fulfill her oath of office. Highlighting the need for judicial intervention is the fact that after her vote against certification of the PPP results, due to lack of information to either confirm or deny the validity of the PPP results, as reported to her by the elections director, the Democratic Party of Georgia, the DPG, sent a letter to all BRE members, including plaintiff, asserting that certification is a ministerial duty and the failure to vote in favor of certification is subject to potential legal action, including but not limited to possible criminal sanctions. This action seeks to clarify that the statutory role of election superintendent assigned to the BRE by Georgia law cannot be delegated in its entirety to the director, that plaintiff's duties are, in fact, discretionary, not ministerial, and that the director may not prevent BRE from gaining access to information needed to fulfill their statutory duties. Simply put, plaintiff is asking the court to direct the defendants to follow the law. As I said, Trump spokesperson Liz Harrington discussed this lawsuit in a series of posts on Truth Social and Telegram. She said, wow, a Fulton County Board of Elections member had to sue her own board because they will not give the board members, the people in charge of certifying their elections, any documentation for what they are actually certifying. And so then she posted some screenshots from the lawsuit of a series of the factual allegations. And I will go through those. Consistent with the Authorization Act, Fulton County enacted an ordinance vesting the BRE with the, quote, powers and duties of the election superintendent of Fulton County relating to the conduct of elections and the powers and duties of the Board of Registrars relating to the registration of voters and absentee balloting procedures. In her role as a member of the BRE, plaintiff has repeatedly sought access to the election processes, systems, records, materials, data, equipment, reports from poll workers, and other vital information. The election materials and processes necessary for her and other BRE members to perform their statutory duties. Together, the election materials and processes are comprised of the totality of the election processes that the election superintendent is required by law to oversee and implement. In particular, under the Authorization Act, the BRE has the exclusive power to certify the results of Fulton County elections. However, without any access to any of the election materials and processes needed to verify the returns and results of an election, BRE members are left to rely on the bare representations of the director. Importantly, the position of director is referenced in the bylaws that were ostensibly promulgated by the BRE. But despite the request of BRE members, neither the council nor the BRE staff have been able to produce an official version of the bylaws in a form or on a date on which the bylaws were passed. The claim is that in the bylaws, the board hereby delegates the powers and duties of the superintendent and the board of registrars to the director, but that the board also acknowledges its ultimate responsibility for the discharge of these powers and duties. This purported delegation provision, this is according to the lawsuit, cites Section 1442 of the Fulton County Code of Ordinances, which, tracking language from the Authorization Act, states as follows: there shall be a chief administrative officer of the board who shall be appointed by the governing authority of the county upon the recommendation of the board, and shall be designated the election supervisor. He shall have such duties and functions in regard to elections as may be prescribed by the board. The election supervisor shall be an elector of Fulton County. It appears the bylaws director fills the role of the election supervisor established by the Fulton County Board of County Commissioners. Notwithstanding the clear statutory language in the Georgia Election Code, the defendants have taken the position the BRE delegated the statutorily assigned duties and powers of the Fulton County election superintendent to the director via adoption of the bylaws, and that members are not entitled to access the election materials and processes necessary for the performance of their duties. So basically, they have delegated all their duties to this one person and now no longer have access to any of the materials, the processes, any of those duties. It's basically just all gone. The board existed, it created the position of director, and now the board still exists. It's just given all its responsibilities over to this one person. From the lawsuit, as a consequence of this delegation, which, as noted above, is unsupported by any official records of the bylaws being formally adopted by the BRE, the current and former chairs of the BRE and the director have refused to allow plaintiff access to the election materials and processes. So it's not even clear that the bylaws were formally adopted, the bylaws that give all the board's power over to the one elections director, who then has full power over everything election related, and the board simply becomes a rubber stamp for that one person's work. Now, the board has had Democrat and Republican representatives the entire time. So consider the complicity and corruption of the Uniparty in Georgia to allow this scenario. This is antithetical to the purpose of public service. Liz Harrington writes in her caption, they claim all authority was delegated to the Fulton County Elections Director based on bylaws that do not exist. When certifying elections, they have refused to give board members things like voter lists and ballot recap sheets so they can check if the numbers even match. In Harrington's next post, she writes, board members can only go by the word of the elections director. Otherwise, if they saw what the election results are actually based on, it would lead to, quote, misinformation and distrust in the electoral process, i.e., the results are whatever they say they are. And so this part of the lawsuit is discussing a letter from the Democrat Party of Georgia to Julie Adams on the Board of Registration and Elections. In response to one of the plaintiffs' requests for a specific document, recap sheets related to vote processing, the director explained that no access would be granted to anything beyond the Excel spreadsheets traditionally prepared and provided by the director to the BRE. The director stated that these Excel documents provide seamless error correction and the documents, quote, undergo rigorous validation processes to ensure their accuracy and compliance with legal requirement, end quote. The director stated that the plaintiff should trust the self-described, quote, rigorous validation process, end quote, employed by the director to ensure accuracy. Further, the director stated that plaintiff's questions on the issue, quote, leads to misinformation and distrust in the electoral process, and that they lead to, quote, baseless allegations that, quote, work against and divide this unit and work against all the voters we serve. So Liz Harrington's summary of the Democrat Party's claims seems rather accurate. She's being told she can't have access to that information and that asking for it is tearing down the faith in the integrity of our elections. At some point, you just have to see these people arguing, hey, we all know that this thing is rigged. You're not supposed to say it. Why did you take this job if you didn't want to work on rigged elections? Later in the suit, the current BRE chair, Kathy Woolard, informed the other members of the BRE that the election materials, in whatever form they would be made available, would not be provided before 8 a.m. Eastern on certification day, May 28, 2024. When the plaintiff suggested that the few hours before the certification vote would be insufficient, Ms. Woolard responded, well, that's going to be what you get. When Ms. Adams asked if she could have the election materials, in whatever form they would be made available, at least a day or two before the date of certification, Ms. Woolard responded, you cannot. Harrington posted another screenshot from the lawsuit. The BRE's failures continued into the 2022 primary, and the State Elections Board was once again compelled to reprimand the BRE for, quote, failing to upload and tabulate results in their entirety. As such, incomplete results were certified. The Fulton County BRE was, quote, instructed to refrain from further violations and admonished to comply with all of the State Election Board rules and Georgia law relating to elections. And there is a series of various election problems, violations, etc. Harrington writes, the same Fulton County that keeps breaking election laws and rigging elections. As I said last week, anyone who would claim to trust the results of our elections anywhere is either a fool or a traitor. Even the people certifying our elections have no direct knowledge whether or not what they're certifying is the product of fraud. They have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that the election results they certify are not the product of fraud. To then certify that, knowing that you cannot actually confirm what you're attesting to, is itself fraud in the certification process. And that dynamic right there is repeated over and over and over at multiple levels all around the country and in our federal government, as they did on January 6th, 2021. You cannot legitimately certify something if you cannot even be sure that what you're certifying is not itself a product of fraud. And of course, it is a product of fraud. And it's actually not that hard for anyone involved in this process to understand that. Even the standard issue villagers out there are finally catching on. Oh, they really will do anything to get Trump. Russian collusion hoax, very fine people hoax, Stormy Daniels hoax. E. Jean Carroll hoax, documents hoax, insurrection hoax, Ukraine impeachment hoax, insurrection impeachment hoax, multiple attempted election steals, convention coups, and the creation of the possibility for an assassination attempt. And they still have not found the silver bullet. They still cannot get Trump. And the fact checks that say this is not evidence aren't working anymore because it is evidence. It's not conclusive, compelling evidence on its own, but it is part of a larger pattern. And it's weird, because if our elections were legitimate and everyone actually hated Trump, then all the rest of this stuff would be totally unnecessary. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's happening!